Thanks as always for listening to Fluff and Crunch. In this episode, Chris and I discuss some genres that we actually think are better for short story arcs, 2 to 3 sessions, or maybe even just one-offs. I'll start recording. Hello, Chris. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm tired today. But whatever. That's I guess neither here nor there. This will help.
Did you stay up late watching the conference final? But for you, they were at a reasonable time, whereas they were only at silly
They were
times
at
for me.
reasonable times, and the only thing I'll say is that the first of the two games was the saddest conference final I've ever seen, because sadly we really didn't get the game that I think everyone had hoped for. When you hack the head off the monster, like 2 plays into the game, it was depressing. And not that I really had a horse in the race. I just wanted to see a good game. I saw the second game was very good, but anyway, that's life.
Wanted to not see the Chiefs in the Super Bowl, so I didn't get my wish.
But you did not get your wish.
No,
but I did have some good gaming this last weekend.
There you go.
I tested out. I had a player missing, and then I had my friend John. He had players missing, and so we combined our groups. And I did a playtest of my expansion. I'm just about, and it'll have been out already for a few weeks by the time this drops. I'm about to finish and publish the first expansion to my fantasy rules in the making for 2D20 World Builders. So we tested out some of the new spells and the spell rules, and we tested out some of the monsters, and it worked. It worked. I got some really good feedback that I incorporated, and it feels good that thus far my core assumptions about how to approach especially spells, it feels like thus far it's working. So that was good. It was fun.
Good stuff.
How about you?
Yeah, we played a third session now of Brian's thing, and I think we'll rotate next time. Although we can't meet this week, so we have to kind of see whether Scott can do the next time, or will it be back to mine. But it was good. We kind of wrapped up a lot of stuff we've been doing. We'd had this mission we got given, and then faffed around doing other stuff, so didn't get to it for 2 weeks, and got to that, and then we went to this big arena thing. So we went to a part of these arena activities, and then both me and Scott got very annoyed. Brian was like, "That was totally what would happen. That we're like under the, I guess, essentially under the purview of this evil empire that we created." But it's like it's next to this. They have this big citadel, and we're all slaves outside the citadel, sort of doing our own thing. They had the big arena fight, and in the middle of this it was like a 32-man fight. And Scott's a tiefling, so he has hellish rebuke. So halfway through this thing, when someone finally hit him, because Brian kept either attacking my character, who seemed more of a threat because they're like a big, beefy fighter, and not attacking Scott's weedy tiefling rogue. So finally someone hit Scott, so he cast hellish rebuke. And then Brian's like, all of the guards around the thing give you a funny look. And we were like, it'll be fine, because we'll just, he's a tiefling. Surely they know this. And at the end of it, having won this event, and we were going to get a good chunk of the pot, and we'd bet on ourselves as well. So we were going to get like an absolute ton of money. They clapped Scott in chains and started carting away. So you're a magic user. And we're like, well, he's not a magic user. He's a tiefling. It's an inherent, it's kind of like trying not to go too hard into the actual rules of D&D. And then they put my character in chains, and I'm like, well, I'm not a magic user. You're friends with him. And started carting us away. And that's how we left it. We were both like, that's not fair. You stitched us up. When we're GMing again, we're screwing over your character. And he was like, well, they don't like magic, and you've used magic in front of him. It was like, so yeah, so that was funny. So hopefully, yeah, we'll see. So I think now he'll let us off. It won't be too bad, because now we're like, we'll pay you back. Of course, that doesn't really work, because if we screw over his characters and when we're GMing, then he could do the same back, and then it could all be very petty. So that hopefully won't happen. But yeah,
It sounds like you had fun though.
We up until the very, very end point, yes, we were having lots of fun, and then it all went a bit no. But yeah, we're right, because now we'll have a break for that and switch back to one of the other two of us. I can't imagine Scott, despite having had about 2 months of prep time at this point, will still not have anything prepared for the next 2 weeks.
Hopefully.
So it'll probably go back to me doing a dungeon crawl. because I've been trying to plan it out and like an overarching story that I'm heading towards. So I've been jotting down ideas, so of where these dungeon crawls are going to go. But it's just ideas for the moment. Well, there's our gaming.
Good deal. Good deal.
I want to throw really quick. This will be really out of date at this point, and maybe we should do another special episode. But as of time of recording, the OGL Fury should now be done, because Wizards just literally on Friday said, yeah, we're just going to stick with 1.0, but here, have the Creative Commons license for 1.5 anyway. Still don't know what the new version of D. That's right. The one thing they've said they're not going to repeal it. They haven't said what will happen with 1 D&D, but anything to do with that would be pure speculation now. So
yeah. I've got my hunches, but I'm going to keep those to myself, or at least not record them here. So we'll see. But for me, it's okay. Yeah, that's great. See what happens. And it actually doesn't affect anything that I'm doing, playing, planning, writing, or anything like that. So, but good for other people. It seems like this is a good thing for folks who have a financial stake in this.
Yes, there's an awful lot of posts on YouTube. We won.
Okay.
We beat them and stuff like that. Okay. Good for you if that's how you feel.
There was this great awful scene in the awful movie Starship Troopers where the one female trooper was like, "Yay, we won!" Yeah, and I'm like, the bug's gonna kill her. Bug's gonna kill her, and then right through her, like the queen sticking its spike, the queen alien, right through the android, and then ripping him in half in Aliens. It was right there. So that's the only indication that I'll give as to my views. But anyway, you're right. It will be grossly.
Speaking of aliens.
Speaking of
horror,
aliens, what a segue.
What a segue.
We're going to talk about games, rather not so much games, but genres that are, we believe, probably better suited for one-offs or short story arcs. And the reason why we think it's useful to talk about this is just to give you something to think about as you're looking at a genre and you're thinking, oh, I'd love to run this, to have in mind as you're planning it, okay, I deliberately only want to run this as a one-off, or maybe 2 sessions or 3 sessions, but it is a clearly limited arc, as opposed to what seems to be the default of, I'm going to run this until we get tired of it. That some things are, we think, are probably just better to deliberately plan to be short duration based on genre.
We've done episodes already on kind of like the differences between campaigns and one shots, and how certain things are, how you have to treat them differently. We've go back, look at our backlog of episodes, particularly if you're new, go back and check those out. But this came from, we were talking about one particular genre, which we'll get to. And I was saying, actually, I'm not convinced this works as a long format game at all. And then we just mentioned, we're trying to think of
I'll just throw this out there just in case, although it does not seem that our listeners don't seem to get kickstarted. That is like the old use of the term from my sense of like, don't seem to get pissed off about things and like twitchy and angry like easily. At least if they do, I have not heard. But I think obviously there are going to be outliers. There are going to be people who, based on the story that a GM comes with and the players, what they're interested in doing, they're obviously going to be outliers. So we're just talking in general and from our perspective here. You're going to say, go for it.
Now let's stick with our segue. Let's go with horror.
Okay, we'll go with horror.
We'll stick with horror.
Go ahead.
I think I'm going to give a really good example of this straight off the bat, because we're saying horror, and we've mentioned Alien. The Alien role-playing game straight off the bat comes with an idea of that you have a campaign mode and you have a cinematic mode, and the cinematic mode is designed as a one-off. And the majority of stuff they've released, they've released I know they released a Marines book, and they've released some other stuff, but 2 of their biggest releases have been big cinematic adventures, which are designed to be played, not in one session, but they're designed to be played in a couple of sessions, and then that's it.
Yep. Yeah, the Destroyer of Worlds campaign, which is a Marine-based campaign, comes in a box, has some really outstanding materials in it. Production quality is great, but it is meant to be it's a movie.
Yeah.
And that's it. And it is meant to have a start, and it has a clear middle, and it has a clear, climax, and then it ends.
Yeah. I mean, I've run that, and I've run Oh, the one when they released like a starter box thing right at the start, and there was sort of one
Yeah.
in that. And I've run that, and both times both times I did multiple TPKs. I essentially killed one party's worth of, and this is when also, okay, I only have 2 players. They were both times running multiple characters. And the first time I went through the entire crew of one ship and then the crew of another ship.
Yep.
And then when I did it with the Marines, similar thing. I like took out a good chunk of the Marines and then took out all the Marines. And then they had an option to play backup Marines for like, to carry the adventure on, and we were just like, nah, we'll just end it here. So, and that wasn't a bad thing. Both times we had a really, really good time, and it was also quite refreshing as a GM, kind of going, I don't have to pull my punches. I don't have to maybe fudge my dice or like be a bit nice here. I can just throw everything at them as those rules as written of the book, and if they all die, then hopefully they went out in a blaze of glory, because
the stories,
was the intention.
The stories are built with the intention of them being high intensity because they're short term.
Yeah.
And I think that one-off, and I mean the blurry line between a one-off, like is a one-off truly one session, like one sitting, or is it a couple of sessions that are in, but it's 2 or 3 sessions, maybe 4. It's meant to be like, this is it. And there is a clear end in mind. Either way, I mean, maybe you can use them interchangeably. But my thought is that these things, they don't involve any kind of experience. That is, if the game has an experience system, there will be no experience gained, used. There will be no advancement during this. What you've got character-wise is what you've got. And that may even extend to like equipment and things like that. It could be really limited in that respect. But I think I think those kinds of things are great. And if something is made to be like that, terrific. And I think that you're right. The adventures, like the what was it called? Was it called Charity?
I think it was Charity of the Gods.
Charity of the Gods, and then there was the
Destroyer of Worlds you mentioned.
Destroyer of the Worlds, and then there was the other short adventure with aliens that was Hadley's Last Hope. It took place on LV-426, and it was the story of when the aliens were brought back by that family. And destroyed the colony. And those are all made to be like that. And if you look at them to as that, and you play them with that intention in mind, they're great. Where does then, with aliens specifically, where do you see that? Because I think you and I are on the same page on this. Where does the trouble come in?
I mean, I don't know if the campaign rules change massively, but essentially you've kind of got this combination in the cinematic thing. Maybe I don't think it is lessened in the campaign rules, because I don't think it has a separate set of rules. I think it's, here's the rules, and there's slight differences.
In the original, in the core book, there's not a lot. I mean, there's the advancement system, but other than that, there's really not a lot explaining that in a way that changes the rules. It's more like, hey, just run this with more story and try not to kill the characters so quickly.
But you mostly have this sort of stress mechanic that as the characters get damaged, as scary things happen, they get more and more stressed. Now, as they get more stressed, they get to do cooler things, but there is more chance of them freezing or them just going crazy and shooting their teammates. I mean, half the times when people died, they were being shot by teammates both times I've run. And then you have things where, like, instead of running away, the character just freezes and they can't run away, and so then they get easily killed. But also the aliens themselves are absolute wrecking machines. That
they are.
This is not. I mean, you go back and watch the films. If you know the films, you know this to be the case. That yes, in Aliens, the Marines plow through tons of aliens. But even then, the first time the Marines go down into there, half of them die. They are left with the civilians, and then 3 or 4 Marines, or some of which are heavily injured. In all the other films, there's one alien pretty much.
Well, there are no other films.
Through the entire thing.
We don't proceed beyond aliens.
But even in Alien, it's one alien that takes out the entire crew except for Ripley and a cat.
I think herein, this is where we can take a specific and we can draw out a generality that I think is definitely applicable to, we file Alien under horror. It's science fiction. It's horror that takes place in a science fiction setting, but the movies, most of them have a strong horror like element to them. And the first one flat out is a horror movie.
Yeah.
The one of the tropes of horror storytelling is that there's got to be high stakes.
Yes.
And for us, I think the thing that makes horror as a genre, I mean us as in people, the thing that makes it horrible is that the stakes are mortality and sanity.
Yeah.
Most often mortality, like something horrible happening to you, and then we add like Cthulhu and whatnot. You have sanity, and so those are high stakes. And the problem is, if you blunt those, then you lose what makes the genre the genre. But on the other hand, if you take them seriously, you just don't have you gut the value of them as high value tropes because, well, my character keeps surviving. I mean, that just seems silly. So I think here that the trouble with horror is that in order to play it right with those high stakes, you're going to burn through characters, or you're going to eat up the characters to the point that they become like not that effective. You know, like Cthulhu, Delta Green, these systems that build in like sanity mechanics. There's a point at which you just have to accept that your character loses it, and now your character's gone. Now, maybe you as a player, you're just like, oh, I'll just use recyclable characters. But I still think that even undercuts the gut punch that the trope of that genre, that high stakes presents, and what makes it actually a special thing. So horror's got this it doesn't have a lot of mileage over the short term because it's like a drag race, not like some kind of like 500 laps race.
I mean, obviously, people do play Call of Cthulhu, but if you were going to play a Call of Cthulhu campaign, you have to expect that at some point, like you said, either the players are not being threatened, in which case it's not scary,
right?
Or they're going to die or go mad.
Right, and then their cousin Bartholomew comes in, and it's like, well,
and like you said, then what's the point of that? Now,
right,
I'm sure super expert people playing play Call of Cthulhu, because I knew people who like only ever play Call of Cthulhu. That was their role playing game. That was what they played. They played it again and again. And maybe if you're an expert on it, that's you can manage.
There's always going to be people who find ways to their satisfaction, and it's not like there's a wrong way to do it. I just think it presents a challenge.
Then maybe it's more of a mystery game and less of a horror. So because we were talking about like, this in film and TV, and like in film, every example we come up with like a horror series, we kind of made the point at some point it's the law of diminishing returns, because either it's something like Nightmare on Elm Street or Halloween or Friday the 13th, where the bad guy keeps coming back and the cast keeps changing. And then those become silly because, well, how this guy keeps dying, how does he keep coming back? Or it's something like, let's say, the Scream series, where the main character keeps surviving, but how many times do different people have to come after the same person before it starts getting just very, very silly? Now, TV, we didn't really have a good example. We said like Supernatural and Buffy, but they're not really like, I mean, Buffy's not really horror. It has horror elements.
It has horror trappings for the sake of having an action teenage soap opera.
Yeah, but like you said, Supernatural is really a monster of the week thing.
Yeah,
and you could argue more that's, so Scooby-Doo. It's not a horror. You can say it's a mystery thing. There's a mystery. They have to solve the mystery, but is there really a threat there? No. Now, if you played Call of Cthulhu like that, where there's a mystery to solve, then that's how you can run a long thing. And so very rarely do you come up against genuinely scary monsters. Maybe that's once a season, if we think in TV terms. Once a season, you might come up against a big, scary thing and then that's maybe when you have a risk of people dying, but you ran for the whole season. And the rest of it was simple mysteries and simple things. And there was no real risk there. And when you were building to something, then maybe you could do that. But then, is that horror? It's a very slow burn horror if it is.
Yeah.
And maybe that's the way you have to go. If you're trying to do a campaign of horror, maybe you have to go more mystery than, because if you're doing straight up proper horror, like you said, it's got to be high stakes, which means people are going to die.
Yep. Once there's a sense among the players that their characters are somehow not answerable to this. They're more equal than everyone else. Now Delta Green, your characters can lose, they can go insane and how these problems. The big thing though, the stakes that Delta Green inflicts on the characters more and through them the players is loss of relationships, breakdown of family and all this stuff. In fact, it's actually quite horrible. For me, actually, I would not be interested in playing that long term, because you're like, there's enough of that going on in the real world. The last thing I want to do is like, wow, that sounds horrible. I think I'll spend my leisure time like simulating horribleness. You hear about like, your friends getting divorced and you're like, that's awful. And then you're like, hey, let's simulate that at our game table. Like to me, that sounds awful. And again, though, I think that horror is a really tough one to do right over the long term. So either you break down, you dull the tropes that make it what it is, because they are so intense, or you accept that, hey, we can do this and we can have a great time with it, but this is going to be a short story arc. And I think that's maybe the value of this episode, is giving people some food for thought to think about, okay, what things should I consider as fodder for a long campaign versus a short campaign in order to get the best out of that genre. What is another one? Actually, it's the one that precipitated the interest in doing this episode. You brought this up.
So the one I brought up was the idea of supers. And obviously this is something we've done entire episodes on why supers is hard to do a role-playing system for. Yes. We've done episodes talking about the train wreck that was the new Marvel system, which is potentially better now. We talked about how we would do it in 2D20. So we spent a lot of time talking at supers.
But we talked about more of the mechanics.
And it popped into my head the other day that after all our focus is always on how supers is really, really hard as a system, that actually, if you look at it in the story and setting, I'm not sure supers is a particularly brilliant like setting or a story, again, over the long term.
Yeah, I agree.
Now, again, there's exceptions to this. X-Men works really well as a dramatic long-term thing. But arguably, to me, X-Men is a soap opera. It's a bunch of people living in this mansion with each other, having relationships. And every week there's something that happens that they go and deal with that, and then they come back and carry on bickering with each other and have different relationships and stuff.
It's a little Buffy-ish, or maybe Buffy's a little X-Men-ish.
No, it's very, very much like that. And that's a different kind of thing. And people have said that, what's the name of it? I know there's a Powered by the Apocalypse, or Masks, that people always gone about as being a really good superhero thing, because they say it's based on things like Young Justice and Teen Titans and that kind of thing, the young angsty people together. And it's not about superheroes, it's about relationships and teen angst again. So you're back to Buffy.
The superheroes, those are just plot devices to throw in to make those other to cast ripples into that pond. The pond is the soap opera.
Yeah. And the same, with like the Smallville role-playing game, literally that was how it worked. You had relationship maps. And so actually the whole thing was about, your characters did things based on their values and your relationships with other characters. And that's what it was. It was a teen drama role-playing game.
So let's talk about your traditional, like 4-color golden age of comics, two-fisted superheroes type of thing. Why is that so hard? And I agree with you.
And so I think if I look at someone like, the classic with Spider-Man, Batman, to some extent, you could argue that a different way. And then Superman, is that I think these are very reactive characters. And almost every single thing is there's a bad guy and he's doing something. And so they might happen in, someone's stealing something. Oh, you stop them stealing, but they get away. And then then it's go into a bigger plot and you stop them.
Chairface Chippendale wants to write his name across the surface of the moon. What are you going to do about it? Yeah.
And that's and then that's repeated ad infinitum. How many times has Batman stopped the Joker? How many times has Peter Parker, got in trouble with a girlfriend because he went out to stop the Green Goblin? These stories have repeated for, 50 plus years in some of these cases. Now, occasionally they do more, big and different and interesting things, but a vast majority of superheroes do have these reactive stories where a bad guy does something, the superhero reacts to that, and then they solve it, and then we come back to the new norm. Now,
it's like the bad guy comes in and disrupts the status quo, and the superhero is there to stop the bad guy, and by doing so, restore balance. In other words, restore the status quo.
Now, again, that's not saying you cannot run a campaign for superheroes, because obviously you can, but I don't think you can run it on the same way we think of in something like D&D. You certainly often don't have the same character progression. I mean, you know,
Right.
Spider-Man is the thing that changed with Spider-Man. His powers haven't really changed massively in his whole comic book arc. Batman's haven't really changed. Superman's haven't really changed. Occasionally we get a character, you know, the
Oh,
original
Wolverine
Robin.
doesn't. I mean,
Yeah,
really,
he doesn't change. Yeah.
it's not
Like
like
you
he
get the
grows
odd
extra
character,
claws.
like the sidekicks, which over time have had to grow up and become their own heroes.
Right.
And that's more of a DC thing because they had child superheroes and Marvel tends to stay away from
Yeah.
it. But that's kind of it. Mostly, you know, we don't see power progression. We might see progression in their private lives. We might see massively different, like, you know, Tony Stark's gone through multiple suits of armor and lost his business and got it back multiple times. And I think he's been Secretary of State for Defense and he's paid for the Avengers and then lost his money and he's had alcoholism. And
Sure.
but a lot of that stuff, again, if everything I just talked through, it's all his non-superhero stuff. That's where he
Correct.
has character growth. It's the non-superhero things. In terms of superheroes, he's fought the Mandarin and Ironmonger and other people. Well, not the Mandarin anymore, probably. But he's fought these same characters for, you know, years and years, and
Yeah.
eventually they ran
Decades.
out of ideas and had him fight Captain America. So again, you can't, you know, we're not saying you cannot do a campaign, but actually, if you think, right, I want to have the main big tropes of superheroes, then maybe some of these work better in a one-off, because actually I
Sure.
think we start
Like if
thinking,
you go, so
going to run
so
out of
this is
ideas.
where, and I know you have. Well, we all have this. You see the movie, you see the TV show, you read the book, and you're like, oh, I want to run this because it's exciting and the contrasts are deep and the colors are bright and it's tropes turned up to 11. That's what makes like a superhero movie like Captain America, the First Avenger. That's what makes those movies so great because it grabs the tropes of the genre and it just cranks them up loud. And so we get excited about, I want to run a game like that. And then, but what you're saying, and I agree with you, is okay, do it, but maybe recognize from the jump that this is only going to be X many sessions. We're going to tell this story. We're going to do this movie. We're going to run a story arc as a movie, and then the movie comes to an end and the credits roll and the story doesn't keep going because it can't really keep going at that intensity. It's just that genre just doesn't lend itself to that. And you're right, you can add in these other things, but then you have to expect that you're probably not going to get the intensity, the tropes cranked up to 11. You just can't keep doing that. Whereas other genres, the tropes are such that they don't need to be cranked up so loud in order for you to feel it. And I
Yeah.
think that's where things like fantasy and some kinds of science fiction, it it's just different, and
Yeah. And I
it
think,
lends itself more to a longer campaign.
you know, we can see this fact with the fact that superhero movies have become a big thing. But, you know, I always had this thing about Batman. Oh, Batman could be a TV series. I think the animated series was great and it ran on for years. But you look at the film, the kind of thing is, who's the bad guy in this film? Now, at the point where you have to come back and start reusing bad guys you've already used,
Yeah.
unless they're super interesting bad guy. I mean, that's, you know, the reason Batman and Spider-Man are two of the most popular heroes, I think, is because they have more interesting bad guys. I'm always amazed that Superman has survived as long as he has as an important character, because Superman's bad guys to me aren't interesting. You know, other people will disagree, but to me, they're always like, no. And I think a lot of heroes are only as good as their bad guys. And that's kind of where you're left with a
Really good
superhero
point.
campaign. You have to keep coming up with really interesting bad guys for them
But
to
it's
keep playing.
still what you said, I think, was very key. The bedrock of the superhero story is inherently reactive.
Yeah.
That the protagonist reacts to something that the antagonist does in order to restore the status quo. And that is a very, you can spit out stories like that. You can see where decades of comic books came with that or through that without lots of navel gazing angst like we see in so many things now. Some, but not, not a ton of it, not a ton of character development, because that's a simple, that's a mill. You can just spit out stories like that. What weird villain comes to town this week? So again, horror, tough because of what the tropes require. Superheroes, same. And what was the third that we want to use as an example?
So you said, and I was half agreeing, was sort of spies.
Like super spies.
Espionage, yes. So we're talking James Bond and Mission Impossible.
Jason Bourne, that kind of like over the top stuff.
Now, obviously, straight away, I said Mission Impossible, and Mission Impossible obviously originally was a TV show.
Yes, it was. with
So
Leonard Nimoy.
yeah. At the same time, Mission Impossible is very, very old, and no one's tried to do anything like that for a very long time.
Yeah.
I think Alias would be the last espionage thing I can think of, and that's still pushing 20 years old. So it's not like people are really doing it anymore. It's not necessarily, it's kind of a similar thing to superheroes. It's not as bad because although you can have reactive spies, I think you can have, you're sent on a mission, go on this mission to investigate something. I think the thing you said is that for the superheroes to be, not superheroes, so the spy espionage thriller to be where it is, if you want it to be exciting, it's got to be, again, it's kind of the horror thing, it's the high stakes.
Yeah.
You want it to be, the guy's going to take over the world. You want proper big plots. You don't have to, it doesn't have to be that crazy, but it needs to be pretty big. And if it's pretty big, it needs to be high stakes. And if it's not high stakes and all of the people survive, I mean, we go back to the first Mission Impossible film. Well, not the first, but the first of the Tom Cruise films. In the first 20 minutes of that film, they kill everyone, well, we think, except for Ethan Hunt. Everybody dies.
Yep.
And in all the Bond films, I mean, how many Bond girls and Bond sidekicks have been killed over the years? Moneypenny and well, not even, I was going to say Q survives or M survives, but M didn't survive. They kill eventually. Yeah. Sorry, spoilers if no one's seen Spyfall. But eventually they killed off M. So, only Moneypenny is safe from, and I guess Q. But they never leave, MI6, so they should be safe. Right. That time when they blew it up. But Bond, whoever, if you're Bond's mate or Bond's girlfriend or Bond's loving, well, you're probably going to die. I mean, that's another thing that actually makes the whole genre a bit weird, because reality, when we talk about super spies, the thing everybody thinks of is now Mission Impossible, Ethan Hunt, it's Jason Bourne. Yeah, it's Jason Bourne and James Bond. Yeah, they're all solo guys. They're not team things. Obviously, Mission Impossible
they pull together specialists who fill specific roles. But you're right. They're never truly ensemble casts.
And the Mission Impossible things try to do that, but realistically, I mean, they killed a bunch in the first one. Now they have kept going back to a couple of characters that have been in multiple Mission Impossibles. But really,
but there's never a whole lot of room for other fully realized characters when Tom Cruise is in a movie.
No,
Tom Cruise movie, the focus is on Tom Cruise.
Yeah, and his running.
That's just his thing.
Because he's got to be running in a film, otherwise.
That's right. And he has to be jumping off of something, and the camera is over his shoulder, and he's pumping his arms and legs. That actually is, I think that's a rider in his contract, like Van Halen and their No Brown M&Ms. Pretty sure. I'm pretty sure.
Now, like you said something about, obviously you could do like a slow burn sort of espionage thriller, like something set in the Cold War and something like that.
Yeah.
And then, that's feasible. But obviously that's not really what we're talking about. We're talking about the crazy
like Gonzo super spies. And I think the difference there, and this is maybe the difference with horror, is that you have to turn the tropes down. You have to turn them down so that which means that you have to settle for, as a norm, you're not going to have, like, you can't always have Spectre trying to take over the world.
No.
But you could do espionage, you could do actually like a long-term Cold War spy thing would, with some elements of super spies here and there, I think would be pretty cool. But it would have to be something, like I said, a slow burn, with some degree of world building by the players. That is like agency and input into what they're doing, not just like working through your way through essentially an MMO that someone else has created. I think those are tough. Those three are really tough.
Yeah. But actually, I kind of think this is a good thing in some ways, because to me, it's kind of like, there are certain things you want to see on film. I don't want to, some people do, but I don't want to really see sort of drama and sort of, I don't go to watch the cinema to watch sort of drama and intelligence stuff, because I'm a Neanderthal. I will go to the cinema to watch because it's on a big screen. So I want to see big stuff. I want to see action and explosion and sci-fi and special effects and stuff, because TV, decent drama works whether it's on a big screen or a small screen. But big blockbuster popcorn movies work on a big screen. So that's the kind of stuff I want to see in the cinema. And by the
And
same thing, you don't want your role-playing games to week after week be crazy, big, massive, big things. So there's nothing wrong. Go, right, we're going to play a 10-week run of a D&D style thing, a fantasy. That's our TV show. And at the end of that, we're going to go and play a different thing. We're going to do a crazy, big superhero, massive, big world ending, stop the asteroid with our superpowers. And then we're going to go back to our TV show. And then there's going to be another big, crazy one-off. Now, it's like a palate cleanser. You get bored of running the same characters week in, week out. Right, we're going to play super spies and we're going to stop the guy who's putting a laser on the moon to destroy America. That sounds to me like a clever way, because that's how films and TV works. People don't go to the cinema every single day. There's not enough films. And if all you ever did was watch the same kind of series again and again, you would get bored. So to me, it's like, the role play. If you can run a campaign for the same thing all the time, brilliant. I can't, I get bored. But I've kind of come into this thought anyway that I don't need to run nothing but campaigns. If I went the opposite way, I was almost running nothing but one-offs.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point, that looking at this from the standpoint of some things are great for movies and some things are great for TV series or book series.
Yeah.
And looking at your genres and your players and your story ideas and thinking what pairings would go best. And that a movie, it's funny, the idea of, it used to be you go to the movie theater because that's where the great big sound and picture is. Well, that's not really the case anymore with home theater stuff. But still, the idea of saying, okay, I'm going to go give 2 hours of my time and it's going to be this very compressed experience where I'm going to get a lot. And the colors are going to be bright. The contrasts are going to be significant figuratively. And I expect that to be a big deal. I don't want subtlety. I want big deal. Give me a series for development. And looking at this and saying, this is the kind of story I want to run. Maybe it would work better for this. And that's fine. Not trying to, obviously, again, you're always going to have outliers and, groups that are able to do differently, but I wouldn't sweat it. I wouldn't get worried. Oh, I really want to do this, or I have this great idea. Maybe it would be best to just treat it in the way that it's, that it works, that it seems to work most naturally with best.
Yeah. And that's why I'll go right back to the start. That's why I love the fact that the Alien role-playing game, they went, look, you can play as a campaign if you want, but we are going to actually aim it at this cinema. They call it cinematics. It's what we've just been saying, that it's kind of the movies versus TV series. They had this cinematic setup and they released adventures for that. Now, obviously, there are plenty of adventures, which might be small things, but what we get from, Wizards of the Coast and Paizo is these massive, big, long adventure paths. They're designed to go, level 5 to 15, and they're meant to take months and months. We don't see a lot of people going, right, I'm going to write massive, big one-off things.
Good point.
Which are designed for, your characters might all die. But it's going to be big and epic and awesome. And like I said, I've played the Aliens thing twice with pre-written adventures, and both times we had an absolute blast.
Mm-hmm.
Both times everyone died.
Yeah.
I don't get TPKs left, right, and center when I'm playing anything else. I have done it in a spy type thing. Millennium's End, I think I took out an entire party, but that was the player's fault, not mine. So yeah, I think certain things do lend themselves, and actually it'd be nice to see more businesses going, we're gonna do this. We're gonna say this is a one-off. We're not expecting you to take these characters on further. We're expecting this to be a one and done and go.
Or not only these characters, but like, and in the case of Aliens, they've always have pre-gens because they're made specifically for that story, and it's like a story in a fish tank, and that's where it's meant to take place. But you don't see that with, like say fantasy. You don't see that with fantasy, where you get you buy a module, not a campaign. You buy a module and there are pre-gens in it for it. And I remember there was a horror game. There we go. Horror game that I used to play back in the mid 80s called Chill. It was the original from this company called Pacesetter. And Chill, all of their modules, which would have worked out to be like maybe 2, maybe 3, maybe 4 sessions. I'd say probably about 3 session stories each. They all came with pre-gens, and of course the system had a character generation system in it. But the idea was that like these are the characters that are that we believe, like we made these for this story, so they work. So it's like you climb inside the fish tank, you have your adventures, and then it's done. And if you don't want, you could use your own character, but that would be an interesting thing. Actually, that's what I'm doing with the adventure, and I'm going to finish and submit it this week. The one that I'm writing for Achtung Cthulhu. Achtung Cthulhu adventures don't have pre-generated characters. That's deliberate. This one will, and they've said thus far that that's cool, because my case was that given the timing and the setting, that is the actual like the context of where and when this takes place in the war, there's no way for people to port in their own characters. And on top of that too, there are some things that the adventure needs, and it would make it makes sense within the story that these are the people who would do this job because of where they are and also because of who they are. So I'm providing 5 pre-gens. It's like, here, do this adventure. You could come up with a way to use these characters elsewhere, but it's actually not meant for that. You definitely don't want to bring in anything. So I think that's kind of cool. Maybe that's something. Maybe that's a niche. That's a space that's missing right now. Instead of the assumption of buy thing, go forever, or go for months, it's going to be buy thing and do it for 3 or 4 or 5 sessions, and it's going to be big.
And we did actually see this in the last Marvel role-playing game, not the one that's coming out, the last one that came out. That's how they designed it. They had books, like the Civil War book.
Right.
Had a bunch of the heroes in it. And then, it wasn't a massive, okay, you could argue it was a campaign, but it was somewhere between a one-shot and a campaign, because it wasn't that long. And, there was kind of like chapter 1, a couple of scenes, chapter 2, a couple of scenes. But that was designed to play through with, yes, you could use your own ones, but then they had all the characters there to use it, because at the end of the day, people want to use the proper characters in those kind of things. So that was designed for that. And of course, we only got that one adventure. There was another storyline that we had the PDFs for, and then never released. So even, so other people have occasionally crossed onto it. I mean, maybe it doesn't sell as well, because who knows? People like part of the thing of role-playing games is people like making their own characters. But, for certain things, maybe it is better we have pre-gens and stuff. Or you find ways of, one of the good things about these kind of things, you want a character that's the one that's going to betray the others. That needs to be written into that character at the start.
Especially Alien, because that's all they do.
There's
always in Alien thus far, there's the betrayer, there's like the deliberate, the willful betrayer. There is the morally weak character who will screw over everyone in the worst possible moment, and then there's the drug addict or the drunk. Like those, I think that they have Free League's like, well, which one's going to be that? Like they just pull those off like orders on a menu. Like we're going to have each of those.
But yeah, if you haven't tried those, go and try them. They're very different to any other role player, just even from running it, but just a very different experience. It's great to be able to kind of go, I don't have to worry about accidentally killing my players. In fact, I swung the opposite way.
I hope you don't kill your players.
I said it again. About times I say that. It's literally swing the opposite. I'm going to do everything I can to kill these characters.
Yeah. Just let it go as it does. Okay, you know what? I think this is good, because this actually gives me an idea with 2D20 World Builders, maybe even to go with the game that I'm developing. Maybe carve this out. Like, hey, if you want to do campaign play, that's great. Here's a setting in which you can do things. But if you're interested in running, or playing some deliberately short-term, call them high-volume adventures, do that instead of this assumption of campaigns. So so think about it.
Makes me want to do a bug hunt.
Yeah,
straight up bug hunt on a thing. Big guns, crazy Marines. One of them's an alcoholic. Of
course. And then there's again, all 3. Well, it's like in I don't know if you have this, because I'm not a big consumer of like your old school British World War II movies. I don't mean World War II movies with British characters in them. I mean from like the British film industry, but from the American film industry, the old school, like up through the 60s or so, like the war movies that were made in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. and then some later from the United States. It's like there's the Italian guy. There's like he's the mouthy Italian guy from Brooklyn. There's always like the hick from the farm. There's always the like the weak in the knees intellectual. There's always the earnest preacher's kid. Like there's certain like stereotype characters that just get plugged in to every single squad or put on every ship or on every whatever.
That didn't end in the 60s. That's Saving Private Ryan.
Oh, I know. Oh my gosh, I've said that for years. I'm like, wait a minute, this is just like the Sands of Iwo Jima. There's no. Wait a minute, hold the phone here. There's nothing new about this.
Maybe it's like if you make a World War II film and with an American crew squad, whatever, and you don't have those stereotypes, people will be like, wait a minute, where's the Italian?
Where's the Italian guy? Where's the mouthy? Where's the hick who can shoot really well and drops like folksy witticisms about tracking raccoons with his pappy or something like that?
Where's the guy who's very religious and has the
Bible
on him with a cross and stuff?
You need what you need is the earnest all-American boy.
Oh yeah.
You need the egghead. Yeah. Oh, totally. All right. I think that does it.
Yep.
Thanks as always for listening. Now, after we stopped recording, we talked for a little while about not genres, but two specific settings from literature and film, both literature and film, that we think are almost impossible to model at the table using rules as written and trying to model the setting in the story as presented in the books and the movies. And that is what we're going to talk about next week.